One of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do as somebody who is training as a historian, or even if you're not a historian, is being curious about the sources that you are asked to read in your classes. One of the reasons that that is important is that ultimately all of your professors are thinking about what it is that you need to get out of the class, and more importantly, who are major influences in the way in which a particular subject is being addressed. So, being curious about who it is that is writing the different sources that you are asked to read helps you accomplish a couple of things. It might help you find out who actually taught those authors, so who it was that influenced them in developing their understanding of history. Where they teach, that is also something that is important during this period. You'll find out what else they might have written that will tell you about the perspectives or perhaps the topics that they are interested in. And you might also find out what they're working on, which is always interesting given that historians and academics are constantly asked to update not only their understanding of history, but also to produce and write history that will be creating some new perspectives. So I wanted to start with the author that we are looking at right now in terms of the book, and that's Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. She, of course, wrote our book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, and she is somebody who was herself a professor of Native American Studies in the Ethnic Studies program at California State University. She is more than a historian, though, because she calls herself an activist. And as a matter of fact, she is currently emeritus, which basically means that she is linked to a university, but is not actively teaching there. And she is currently involved in all sorts of initiatives that are trying to call attention to the perspective of Indigenous people in all sorts of different subjects. So, as you can tell from the books that I highlighted here, these are some of the last books that she has written. Not a Nation of Immigrants, of course, which expands on the notion of settler colonialism and white supremacy, which you read about in the first chapters in the book. You have All the Real Indians Died Off. And that is a book that she actually co-wrote. One of the things that we are beginning to see increasingly in the context of history is that for folks who are well established or tenured, they are likely to co-write books, which traditionally in the Historian Academy has not been seen as something positive. So we are beginning to see some change there. And then lastly, Loaded, which is a book that actually talks about both gun violence as well as violence in general relative to not only the Indigenous community, but the United States at large. So if you go online, there are plenty of interviews that have been recorded by her. And I did want to take an opportunity to talk about her perspective. So one of the things that you have probably noticed is that the writing style is very simple in the way in which it approaches topics. What we are going to do in the class, of course, is expand on this by showing you some more traditional perspectives on all of the different topics that we address. But she wrote this particular book with a purpose. And while all historians have a purpose in what they write, this particular book is one of the first to present a perspective that is primarily from Indigenous communities or a Native American perspective. And so what you'll notice is that in terms of the writing, it is argumentative in nature. She is trying to prove a point. And I chose this book on purpose because while I can present you with lots of other historians who are writing about Native American history, this perspective is fairly unique. For the most part, if you are reading and you are not uncomfortable with some of the ways in which she presents her arguments or makes the arguments that she makes, then you may want to reread the book. The reality is that while many things may resonate perhaps with some of the things that you know about Native American history or the specific historical events that she is addressing. The reality is that she wrote this book to challenge the traditional way in which we tend to think about US history. And so it's a unique perspective. It is a perspective that we, for the most part, do not see unless you are embedded in reading Native American history. Most of us do not encounter historical writing by Native American peoples themselves. And so this is a perspective that I thought was important. And this, of course, brings us into an interesting caveat in addressing Native American perspectives. Now, that is not to say that Native American people are the only people who can write about the Native American perspective. Dunbar Ortiz has made some claims as to her own ancestry, and at this point in time, at least from the research that I have done, she claims to be Cherokee. However, as you will find as we continue our discussion from this Native American perspective, claims of Native American belonging are fraught with all sorts of caveats. And in all fairness, I'm going to say that while she definitely presents an Indigenous perspective in terms of the way that she frames the book, whether she is Native American or not, that is still a question mark that I have in terms of thinking about her. However, as a scholar and as a historian, the prior work that she has done certainly gives her the authority to speak from an Indigenous people's perspective, given that a lot of her own work was really focusing on that as a historian. So if you have any questions, if you want to discuss her work further, do not hesitate in contacting me. I'll be happy to engage. I may not know all of the work that she does, but this book certainly gives you a good introduction to the type of perspective that she employs. The other person that you were introduced to was Karen Wolf, and Karen Wolf is somebody that is important on a number of things that we will be looking at throughout the semester. She is currently the Beatrice and Julio Mario Santo Domingo Director and librarian of the John Carter Library. She is also a historian at Brown University, so she holds a position within the history department there. She is primarily a historian of the U.S. Atlantic world, and what you see here is her first book, Not All Wives, which is about women of colonial Philadelphia. She cites her interest as being those that are focused on gender, family, and politics in the 18th century, and she is currently working on a book that is forthcoming. The reason that I wanted to call your attention to Karen Wolf, she, of course, is the person who wrote those blogs on vast early America, but also because she is somebody who is connected to the 1619 Project. And we will be discussing that as we move through our class, because it is something that we should definitely address and you all should be aware of as far as where historians fall on that particular project. And so prior to her stint at Brown, prior till 2021, she was the executive director of the Alejandro Institute. And we're going to be talking about the two major organizations that look at the issues of early America that we will be exploring in this class. One of them is the Alejandro Institute, which is the repository of the William and Mary Quarterly Journal, which is one of the main sources for information for early American historians, and then the Society for Historians of the Early Republic, which is SHEAR. But she actually was tied to the Alejandro Institute, and again, we will continue to be reading what her work and her influence in early America. The last person that I wanted to talk about is somebody who we will be discussing later. But her book, Eliza Lucas Pinckney, An Independent Woman in the Age of Revolution, is Dr. Lori Glover. And Lori Glover is currently the John Francis Bannon Endowed Chair in the Department of History at St. Louis University. So she's close by, and she's also happens to be my mentor. She is a prolific writer of early American history. These are just some of the books that she is involved with. In addition to that, she also has written a textbook that on early America that is very popular. And so I wanted to introduce you to her because she, of course, is somebody who is interested in social history of the English colonies and the early American Republic. And we will have an opportunity to actually interact with her later on the semester. Next week, I'll be sending a survey to see how many of you might be available to be part of a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting that will bring Dr. Lori Glover into our classroom, and you'll have an opportunity to ask her questions about her book as well. So one of the things that I do want you to keep in mind is that for Dr. Glover, if men are not wearing breeches, she is not interested. And so, one of the things that we don't often consider in thinking about time periods is clothing. But breeches, of course, are those short trousers that men used to wear. And then, of course, they would hike up these longer looking socks or tights. And of course, that fashion will go out of style in the early 19th century. So she really stops there as far as her work goes. Anyways, I definitely think she'll be somebody that you will enjoy meeting, if only virtually. And I look forward to getting as many of you as possible to be part of that conversation. So I want to encourage you as we move forward to always research who your authors are. That way you'll be able to find what they study, what their research interests are, where they went to school, what they have written before, and more importantly, why they are authorities that you should be reading at this point in time. If you have any questions about any of these folks or any of the people that we will look at as we move forward, let me know. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing both your reactions and questions about the authors as we move forward.